I'd like to talk about an important idea in consumer theory, the idea of substitutes and complements. It turns out that the consumption of some goods depresses the demand for other related goods. These are called substitutes. So take the examples of hamburgers and pizza. If you ask the question, hey, I'm hungry, should I eat a burger or a pizza? The notion there is that, well, either one could fulfill the function of filling your stomach, so they're substitutes. A little bit more technically, we could say that they're related according to their prices. So for example, if the price of pizza rose, what would happen to the demand for burgers? Well, if they're substitutes, then if the price of pizza went up, then the demand for burgers would go up. And so in fact, that's one of the definitions of substitutes. If the price of a product goes up, the demand for another product goes up, then those products must be substitutes. New products can be substitutes for existing products. We see this vividly in lots of examples, but one example that I find interesting is the example of the new product called Napster, which appeared in 1999, and compact discs that had music printed on them. Now, what was Napster? Napster allowed people to obtain music for free, illegally, by the way, and so that's a reduction in the price of one means of getting music. And what did it do for the demand for compact discs? Well, if you thought they were substitutes, you'd expect a reduction in the price of music via MP3 files to reduce the demand for compact discs. Well, let's see what happened. Here's a picture of recorded music revenue in the US from 1973 up to about 2009. And what you see is that it was rising till about 1999, when Napster appeared, and then that big yellow region, which is revenue from CDs, began to plummet. Yes, indeed, it does suggest that Napster provided a substitute for compact discs. Consumption of some goods, by contrast, stimulates demand for other related goods, and we call this relationship complementarity, or we call these goods complements. Some old school examples of complements are peanut butter and jelly. The idea being that they're better together, and if they're better together, then if the price of peanut butter went up, well, that would make the thing that's useful with peanut butter, the demand for that would go down. So it's a different relationship between prices and quantities for complements than for substitutes. Another intuitive way to think about it, though, is just that these are useful to consume together. What are some other examples? Well, razors and razor blades provide an important example of complementary goods. They're not very useful except together. That is, they're not very useful alone, but they're very useful together. There's a really old school example of cameras and film. Wow, that's a dusty example, but there it is. And a slightly more contemporary example of printers and printer cartridges. Each of these is pretty useless alone, but together they're pretty useful. If we want to move all new economy, we can think about hardware and software providing additional examples of complements. So there's an Xbox and there's a game for an Xbox. Those are clearly complements to one another, as are the Kindle reading device and the whole library of Kindle books. So a Kindle ebook is not very useful without a Kindle, nor is a Kindle very useful without some ebooks to read. So those are clearly complements as well. And finally, it's not too surprising to think that an iPhone or iPad or iPod is a complement for the music available either through the iTunes Music Store or through whatever means you have to get music. Imagine for a second that music were really expensive. You could only buy an MP3 file or a digital music file for, say, $10 per song. Then you probably wouldn't be willing to pay much for a device that played them. On the other hand, suppose music were freely available, even at a zero price. Well, that would make the hardware that plays the songs really valuable. So you have this relationship between complements. Right now, we're living in interesting times, and we, I guess, as a society, but certainly our governments and our industry representatives are trying to figure out whether streaming music is a substitute or a complement for recorded music. So, think about services like Pandora. Pandora is what is known as a non-interactive streaming music service. It's non-interactive in the sense that you can't choose exactly what you're going to hear. You can seed a station and get things that are approximately like what you want to hear, but you can't choose exactly what you want to hear. Now, what's been happening to Pandora use? It's been rising rather quickly. Very recently, it's kind of plateaued, but basically the story of the last 5 years is rapid increase in use of this non-interactive streaming service. The other streaming service we hear a lot about, of course we hear some about many more streaming services, but the other big kahuna is Spotify. Spotify is an interactive streaming service, meaning you get to choose exactly what you're going to hear. So it's kind of like a jukebox where you're connected to everything. What's been happening to Spotify? Well, it's been growing very rapidly with sort of no decline in recent growth. Recently crossed 15 million worldwide paid users in late 2014. Well, in any event, this is all just set up. There's been great growth in streaming music services, and the question is whether this is a substitute or a complement for the sales of recorded music. Or to put it another way, does the use of these services stimulate demand for recorded music, either sold as old school CDs or as digital music files, or does it provide a substitute? Well, it's a pretty new question, but we get some recent evidence here. So as streaming has been exploding, we see that digital music sales have been falling. Let me just talk through these pictures for a second. On the left-hand side, you see U.S. streaming revenue. It's divided into these three kind of blandly named categories. On-demand streaming, ad-supported. Now that's basically YouTube. That's people listening to music at YouTube. Paid subscriptions. That's basically Spotify. And sound exchange distributions. That's basically Pandora. And what you see is collectively those have really jumped a lot, especially since about 2011. On the right-hand side, you see U.S. digital music sales divided into download albums and download singles. In any event, you see that guy was rising very quickly since 2003 when the iTunes Music Store appeared. It's been rising very quickly, but maybe surprisingly, since 2012, it's actually been falling. That provides at least a strong suggestion that some forms of streaming are serving as a substitute for the sales of music as opposed to a complement. And by the way, that's why Taylor Swift and Spotify, well, they've kind of had Splitsville feelings. You may know that Taylor Swift decided to pull all of her music off Spotify recently, and this is why. Because she sees that if she's on Spotify, she's going to sell a lot less than if she weren't on Spotify. We'll return to this issue in other parts of the course, but it's an interesting recent event that shows us about this complements and substitutes question and about how important it is.